and welcome back to the series video of Saigon Online Tech City. And the topic today is from engineer to an entrepreneur. And our guest today is Mr. Dave. He is currently the head of product development at TINYpulse. So hi Dave, can you introduce a little bit about yourself?
Sure, my name is Dave Hajdu. I'm the head of product development here at TINYpulse in Saigon. So my background, I went to the University of Washington. Prior to that, actually, I played a lot of tennis. In my first year of college, I tore my knee. And so when I couldn't play on scholarship anymore, I quit school for about 4 years. And that's when I started my first business. And so I was teaching tennis, I opened up a store, I lost all my money, and then I went back to school. And so that was kind of my first entrepreneur experience. And then after graduating from the University of Washington, I went to work for Microsoft, and I worked in a database group. So we actually did all the kind of internal database transaction work, as well as all the e-commerce stuff. So we had a lot of money that flowed through our system through EDI and BizTalk server. And so I spent about 4.5 years doing that. And then shortly after Microsoft, I started my first company, my first software company anyway. And that company evolved from being a content management system for small businesses to basically outsourcing, and that's when I came to Vietnam. And so we grew that company to about 70 people, and then about 2.5 years ago, I was getting a little bit burnt out doing outsourcing, and that's when I joined TINYpulse.
So you had experience with Microsoft and corporate. So what was the transition like from Microsoft to entrepreneur?
Yeah, it's interesting. So Microsoft, it's a big company, right? And it's very structured. And so the nice thing about that is you get an opportunity to learn, and you get an opportunity to learn something very specific, and they have a lot of resources. But the hard part about it is you're very specific. And so unless you move around a lot, and back then, like this was right when I started working at Microsoft about a year before the stock market crashed. So probably all you young people out there don't remember this, but in 1999, you had the dot-com boom, and then everything crashed. And I would say probably like 50% of the internet companies went out of business at that time. And so at that time, Microsoft froze everything. So you can't move, you can't hire. So it was kind of a tough time to be at Microsoft. You didn't have the freedom as you wanted to. But corporation is just different. There's so many rules, there's so many processes. My friend worked for the Office group, and just to build the project takes a day. You know, so you finish something and it's a one-day cycle, right? And so like the Office group, their cycle is 1 year. So 3 months planning, about 4 months development, and then the rest of it's QA and beta, right? So the cycles are incredibly long. Nowadays at Microsoft, under the new leadership, they're trying to become more agile, but you find any big companies, it's really hard. And the main thing you're trying to do is not make a mistake. You know, so like my group, we did all the e-commerce transactions, and they would say for every minute that it was down, it's $100,000, right, that you're losing. And so, and when you think of the scale of like an Office product, you know, for any mistake, you know, you're affecting 1 million people, right? And I think that was something that, you know, you learn to be super careful, you learn to go really slow, you learn to be very methodical. So when I opened a company, all of a sudden it was like this whirlwind. Everything started going so fast, and you started realizing that you know nothing, right? Like I learned probably more in my first 3 months of doing my software company than I did in 5 years at Microsoft, because at Microsoft I got very deep. I learned SQL Server, I learned EDI, but I didn't know anything about accounting. I didn't know anything about marketing. I didn't know anything about, you know, digital media. I didn't know anything about using Photoshop and things like that. And as a small business owner, all of a sudden it was like you're doing a little bit of everything all the time. And I think that to me is like kind of the fundamental difference, is like the pace and the growth and the change. I think it's a very humbling experience.
So as an entrepreneur now, what do you think is more important, like getting the business side right or the product side right?
Yeah, it's interesting because I've heard this asked before, like, you know, would you rather have a shitty product and great sales? Would you rather have a great product and no sales? So the reality is most engineers, you know, and we always think that, hey, we want a great product, right? And we're going to perfect it, and we're going to work really hard. And my old partner graduated from Princeton University, incredibly smart guy, perfectionist. You know, everything had to be exactly right. But we started realizing that it didn't matter most of the time. You know, most of the time, like as an entrepreneur, like you you know your product so well, or you think you know it so well, but you realize your customer is just a normal person, right? And so I think that the marketing side, the sales side, the messaging, and even like kind of the internal marketing of the product is so critical. I think that's why a lot of engineers that try to make that transition have a hard time, because they don't move fast enough, they don't test enough, and they try to be too perfect, right? And the perfect product at the end of the day doesn't really matter, right?
So what kind of mistake does the engineer who become entrepreneur usually make?
Yeah, I think the first mistake I made was understanding cash flow, and accounting. I think it's not a subject engineers study in school, and so when I had my tennis shop, I didn't really understand that. I didn't understand inventory management. I didn't understand, what burn rate was going to mean, and if I have that burn rate set 8 months, I'm out of business, right? These concepts just weren't in my head, and I think that most engineers that make that transition, I think that's the first mistake they make, is not really understanding the finance, and then not getting the right people around them to help them understand the finance. I think that's probably one, and I think the other kind of goes back to the thing I talked about before about big companies. Is a lot of engineers, they try to perfect too much, right? And if you read the Lean Startup, they talk about these fast iterations, right? And it's just so critical that you get your product and you test, and you don't assume that you're right. One of the best books I read recently is the Google Sprint book, and they talk about that, and they talk about doing these 5-day sprints where you really focus on the problem, and then how you're going to try to solve that specific problem, and then you prototype it, and then you test it, right? And the testing is so important. And I think it's so easy to, as an entrepreneur, feel like, hey, I know exactly what I want to do. But the reality is none of us do. We're not that smart, right? And so that customer-centric feedback is critical. And I think most engineers, they're very used to getting requirements, right? So I have a job, and I get requirements come in, I code it, I test it, I make sure it matches the requirements, right? But when you do your own business, you have to become more customer-centric, right? And I think that's one of the most critical mistakes that entrepreneurs start to make, especially engineers, because engineers, we all tend to have a little bit of ego, right? We think we know the best way to do something. But the reality is, the way we think is very different than most of our customers. I thought it was kind of interesting. I saw a quote about the internet, purchasing in America, and it's something like 65% of purchasing is women, right? But yet engineers, it's 80-something% male, right? And so if those engineers aren't taking the time to involve women, in their process, they're missing out on the major purchasing power on the internet, right? And so that's just some of the ways where being customer-centric is really critical.
And what do you suggest the engineer to an entrepreneur to focus on to be successful?
I just think the customer and the customer problem. So there was a guy named Joe who worked for us once, and it's funny because myself and the other David, we always like to think, okay, feature, right? And Joe would always come in and say, what's the problem you're trying to solve? So, I don't know, that's a good feature, right? But I think that if you start with that problem, then right away you start to easily understand, okay, did this solve that problem or not, right? As opposed to, hey, that feature is slick and it does something, but what are you trying to do right here? Interview me. So does this camera solve that problem? Great, buy it, right? If not, if it doesn't stay still, if there's no tripod, then it's not going to work, right? So.
And what kind of mindset an engineer should adopt in order to become an entrepreneur?
I think to me, my investor Steve Anderson, when he got up and talked to our company one time, he said, at the end of the day, it's going to be extremely hard, right? And he said, working at any startup is going to be amazing and it's going to suck, and it's going to be amazing and it's going to suck. And he said when he invests, one of the first things he looks for is drive. So you have to be willing to be that person who you're going to fall down, right? And you have to accept that. You have to be willing to get up again, right? And as you start leading more people, you have to be willing to get up again and be strong, right? So that all these other people can get up with you, right? And I think that that driven mindset, I think, is critical. I think the second part is just being agile, right? Understanding that, another one of our investors, John Keister, he got up and he talked to us and he said, if you come to work and every day you're prepared to change, you won't be surprised, right? And I think that's the life of a startup, right? And so I think a lot of engineers that come from a corporate background, they're not used to that, right? Every day is kind of the same. And so you have to come in with this mindset that, you know what, I'm gonna have to work hard, I'm gonna have to get up off the ground, and I'm gonna have to change, right? And so I think those things are really critical.
And also for engineers, they're not used to hiring people, but they will have to when they become entrepreneurs. So do you have any advice for them?
Yeah, it's funny because at Microsoft, I went through, I don't know, I used to call it the HR revolution. So, we had all these smart engineers, right? And this company was growing from 5,000 to 10,000 to 50,000 people. You have to fill in manager roles, right? And so, I think Vietnam, I see this all the time. An engineer feels like my promotion is to become a manager and manage people, right? But most engineers hate that. And at Microsoft, right about when I started, Bill Gates, he came up with a new title, and it was a VP of engineering. And that person didn't manage anybody, right? They were just an individual contributor that wrote great code and was paid a VP salary, right? And he created that track so that engineers didn't have to feel like they had to manage people, right? And I think you'll find most engineers don't like it. So, but if you go do a startup, you don't have much choice, right? Like if you're a founder, one of the first things you're gonna have to do is hire good people, right? And surround yourself with people that fill in the things that you don't do well. And from that point, you have to be able to lead them, right? And we don't even like to use the term manager here anymore. We like to use leaders, right? And we like to lead with solutions. And so that, I think, mindset for an entrepreneur is a big shift to where a lot of them are, because I come here, I want to write my code, right? But now I'm coming here, maybe I don't write any code today, right? Maybe I'm helping you write code, or maybe I'm helping my accountant, understand my numbers, or my marketing team or something. And so I think that skill set is something that you have to develop. It's something that you have to be ready for. And then in some cases, what ends up happening is if you find the right partner, maybe you can avoid some of that too, right? Like you can pair yourself up with somebody who's more of a leader, who likes to work with people and develop people. But I think that's, it's important, very important. And then when it comes to hiring, at the end of the day, they say the most important job you have as a leader is to hire good people, right? And they say the next person you hire should have one thing they do better than you. You should learn something. I did an interview for a marketing guy here once, and I sat in that interview and I was like fascinated, He was like teaching me how to do this marketing plan, and I'm thinking, that's the guy I want to hire, right? Because I just learned more in this interview than I have in like a year about marketing, right? And so that's kind of the type of mindset you have to have. And I think sometimes as leaders, our ego gets in the way. Like it's hard to find someone that's better than you, right? And admit that they're better than you. But I think letting that ego go and then really searching for that and being self-aware. When you first do a startup, you might have 2 people, 3 people, partners, and then you have to figure out what are you not good at, right? And that's another thing that I think is really hard for us as people, for me to say, you know what? I'm actually not good at leading people. And so if I'm not, I got to find somebody who is, right, and help me with that role. And I think that's the thing a lot of engineers face when they get into entrepreneurship.
So what if you have to do something that you are not really good at, but it's only you can do?
It happens all the time, right? So I think that's like, the first thing I say is read, right? Like Mark Zuckerberg says he reads a book every 2 weeks, Bill Gates once a month. Any great leader says they usually have a routine where they wake up in the morning and the first thing they do is they read something positive, right? And they learn something. And I think that's, if you have that thirst for learning, then you're going to be able to solve those kind of problems, right? Because, I remember the first time I had to do a flyer, and I was thinking, how do I do this? It's like, okay, let me download this Photoshop program. It's this massive program, and I'm trying to manipulate it, and I stayed up all night, But that's that drive, right? Like you have to have the drive and then have that willingness to learn, and then, you just get stuff done, right?
So thank you very much for sharing with us a lot about how to become an entrepreneur, a manager, and even a leader in tech. And I hope you have learned a lot from Mr. Dave. And if you have more questions, you can comment below and we can transfer the question to Mr. Dave. Thank you very much.